Hi, everyone. This is Derek Harp, the founder and chairman of the Control Systems Cybersecurity Association International, or as we call it, just CSA. CSA is a 501c6 nonprofit workforce development association dedicated to helping grow, support, and sustain the professionals charged with the cybersecurity of control systems. We're specifically talking about those systems that have pumps and valves and actuators, real cyber to physical moving parts, and control nearly every aspect of our modern connected industries. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. It is my hope you find it inspirational or motivating or revealing or informative, and perhaps at times even a little entertaining. Take care and be well. Hi, this is Derek Harp, founder and chairman of CSA and the host of the CSA podcast show. And I have another great guest on today, Mike Holcomb. He is fellow and director of cybersecurity. He is the ICS OT cybersecurity global lead at Fluor. And if you don't know Fluor, you may have been in one of their buildings somewhere. They are a huge multinational engineering construction firm with over 40,000 employees. I know from past conversation that Mike's been involved in many very, very interesting big building projects. So welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it. And thanks for the invite and having me.
Yeah, well, long overdue. Thank you for also becoming a CSA fellow, which we're excited about having you part of that.
Thank you.
Not long ago, also overdue. And you're sort of the perfect, multi-factor checklist item for CSA. You teach and you educate and you're focused in this area. I mean, there's lots of very amazing lineups with CSA's mission, with your life and mission too. So
yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Let's talk about, unravel the Mike story. I always like to start at the beginning. People always ask us in our community, how do I get to this job or how do I get to that job? And I think with this podcast in a way, we're sort of demystifying it and saying, there are lots of pathways to where people have ended up. But let's go back to the origin story. All cybersecurity folks are some sort of modern day superhero in my book. What's your origin story? Where do you come from?
Yeah, we all have different paths for sure. But for me, I grew up in San Diego. I grew up in a family, not a lot of money. We never missed a meal, so can't really complain. But we did struggle a lot. But growing up, two things that really I think happened for me. One is my grandparents had saved up every penny they had to get me an Apple IIc when those came out, and went to a couple of programming classes for summer school. I am not a programmer or a developer in any stretch of the imagination, right? But it did help me get my hands on a computer. And I definitely had the computer bite, just maybe not so much for programming. And about the same time, the school, I was in junior high, started to get Apple IIcs in the lab. And I remember seeing this kid in there, and my buddy Chris, who he would be the kid that was cracking games so he could copy them, and or he'd download them off of a BBS, or he would write cheat codes, right? So you get unlimited gold for Bard's Tale or unlimited lives for whatever game he was playing. So me being the really good boy I was, I would never ever think of doing anything like that. but I was fascinated watching him do it and kind of learning, the ins and outs and the nuts and the bolts. And then it just kind of always stuck with me, kind of my love for computers. And then also this kind of in the back of my mind, it was always, Chris was the nicest guy you would ever meet. And at the same time, it's like, oh, he was downloading these games and cracking them illegally, right? You're breaking the law. And I think the best story with him was his family didn't have a ton of money either. And he was actually one of the founding members of the Cult of the Dead Cow, which was, the old school hacking groups back in, this is late 80s. And I remember he would dial into their bulletin board system, and they were in like El Paso, Texas. Of course, back on the old dial-up lines, and we're in San Diego, and we're a bunch of junior high / and then high school kids. We didn't have the money for that to make those phone calls. So he actually lived in front of his church. And so he was the guy that rewired the phone box on the street to use the church lines to make those long distance calls. So nothing ever came of it. So, and I hopefully the legal timelines have expired.
Statute of limitations have run out.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, statute of limitations has run out for stupid kids doing stupid things. So
Those stories are amazing because that is very you and I are cut from the same cloth. And I had a Commodore 64, and it was all about dialing up to BBSs over 300 baud. I don't remember if you remember your
Oh
first.
yes. Yeah, I know. Actually, well, and I was so excited when I got my 1200 baud modem and something was broken in it, and so it would only do 300.
I was
So
envious of the 1200 baud. I had a couple friends in my circle that had the 1200 baud, and I was still stuck on 300. And yeah, that's a big deal.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was a big pain. So, but yeah, well, Chris always just stuck in my mind, and as I got more involved in computers, I just always had security in the back of my mind because Chris is the nicest guy, would do these things. What would somebody do if they had, evil intent? Or I can understand, if I'm, I don't know, a father in the middle of Ukraine today, right, trying to feed my family, and I don't have any other options but turning to cybercrime. I don't necessarily know if I can blame that person. And so it just always stuck with me, and it was just always this: we have a need for cybersecurity. So I've just always been a cyber security nerd since pretty much day one, even though, of course, we never knew what cybersecurity was back then.
So coming out of those formative years, what did you pursue as job or education? What came first? It wasn't cybersecurity right away, right? If I understand.
Yeah, so I went in. So my first job, I was actually up against Chris for, was in high school. I actually got a job beta testing software for the company that, if some of the older folks might remember, CorelDRAW. And then they also had, and I forget the name, but if I said it, you would know it. It was basically the original product people used as their word processor prior to Microsoft Office, and they had like an Excel spreadsheet. It was like Work 123 or something like that. And so I was the beta tester on that, and they had PCs, which was absolutely amazing. So that was my first experience with PCs, and those lovely orange screens. And then I ended up writing. Just because of my fairly decent writing skills at the time, I wrote probably about half of their 800-page user manual, which I thought was pretty funny as a junior in high school.
Was WordPerfect the product you're thinking of?
Yes, it was WordPerfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a consultant company that did a lot of the work under the hood for the main company. Yeah.
When I first got to the Navy, I was on, an old clunker computer using WordPerfect. So I recall some of that quite well.
If you read the user manual, that like half of that was me.
I probably read. I mean, that's wild. I probably, floating around somewhere in the middle of the ocean, read some writing that you wrote. I love it.
It's funny, isn't it? So yeah, some high school kid making minimum wage, $4.25 an hour.
So what happened? What happened next? What did you decide to do going from post high school?
So I had a little weird kind of track from there. Actually ended up, that job only lasted about a year, and then they kind of were done with high school kids. Long story short, we actually got in trouble for playing video games after hours because the boss actually brought in investors like at 9 o'clock at night, and here's two kids playing Star Trek on the PC. In the lab. They didn't like that. We weren't there much longer, a couple weeks, and then I ended up working in the movie theater in town. The best job I've ever had. I still say that today. I've always been a movie fan. Used to go to the movies with my grandpa all the time growing up. Still go to the movies a lot. So glad the movies are back after COVID. And so we did that. That lasted for about a year. Then ended up, and I was starting to go to UCSD for school after I graduated high school. So I wanted to go into computer science. And I actually wanted to also do psychology because I was actually thinking artificial intelligence back then. I thought that was just really,
you think AI, I mean, I don't know, all these years later, you think that's really going to, come into being and be useful and everybody going to talk about it anymore?
Right. I know, 2024, right? Completely different world than 1990. But they had a real interesting program at UCSD. The problem was when I started going to school, they said, oh, even though you're a computer science major, you don't actually take your first computer class till your junior year. I became pretty disenfranchised or disenchanted with school pretty pretty quick, but both still going through the school thing. The sad turn in my life, my dad actually had passed away then. And so I was also working in a bowling alley at the time, and I was working in the back. So I was doing electrical and I was doing mechanical. So I do have a little of kind of OT background from, or cyber
Yeah.
physical systems from that perspective, and doing the wiring and the computers, running everything from a Windows box. So all this kind of happens all at once. The same time the bowling alley shut down. So I was like, my dad just died. I don't have a job. I'd just broken up with my girlfriend. It was just like the whole world was against me. And so this company comes in, bunch of gentlemen that used to work in the oil fields in Oklahoma, and they stripped out the bowling alley, because what they do is, bowling alleys were just going bankrupt left and right in the States. And so they would strip them out and they would take them and put them in overseas. And so they're like, hey, you bust your butt. Yeah, you work really hard, the electrical, the mechanical, and you can hook all this up. He's like, you want to go with us? We got jobs lined up in Beijing and Moscow, not so popular these days, but it was just
it was cost effective to take all the bowling infrastructure out and transport it to another country and then install that as a brand new bowling alley.
They literally would strip it down to the bolt, down to the screw, put it in shipping containers, and and then you would just get on a plane, and eventually those shipping containers would show up where you are, and you just do the reverse and put it all back. Now what they also did was, we had a 60-lane bowling alley where I was in San Diego, one of the nicest actually in the area. And then you go to China, where the first bowling alley I built was 4 lanes.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, and then we built. I think the biggest one that I built while I was in China was 30. But yeah, I actually showed up in China. I dropped out of school to go travel around the world with these guys, and showed up in China, and met him in Hong Kong. We went across the border into behind the Red Curtain, back in the day.
To put in critical infrastructure. I mean, depending on someone's disposition,
Right. Depending on how you look at it.
I think in 100, plus episodes, this probably come as a shock to you. You are the only one that has installed bowling alleys around the world. I mean,
I'm sure that was
more people, but you have that distinction.
My international experience. Yeah.
That is awesome.
Yeah, well, and it took definitely another turn, because I was there one day in country, and the boss I was working for, the American boss, he gets in a fight with the Chinese boss. And so the American guy tells me, he's like, I'm going home tomorrow. You can stay or leave. And I was like, my dad died. I just dropped out of school to the point where I actually ended up with all Fs, because I was past the drop point. I'm like, I don't have a job to go back to. I was like, you know what, I'll stay. And so I ended up staying, and that ended up being about 2 years. And then I lived in China and built bowling alleys, and then I got a lot of requests to do a lot of other computer work. They see, oh, you can read an English manual and computer stuff. Come help us out with this and that. So I did that for 2 years, and then trying to make the little. What's that?
Did you speak any Chinese then, or do you now?
ED, very, very little. I've lost it all just because I haven't used it. Yeah. I remember coming home and calling my mom in the taxi. She's like, "What are you saying?" And I didn't even realize I was talking in Mandarin. It was just because I wasn't with any English speakers, so I had.
Did you go there with any previous knowledge, or just gained it on the fly?
Well, the funny story is I showed up and I got a book to learn Chinese. Well, I learned Cantonese. So I spent all this time learning Cantonese, and then I show up and we go north, and I start talking, and they're just like, "Yeah, that doesn't work here." There's this thing called Mandarin that's spoken in 99% of the country, and you're not going to live in Hong Kong. You're actually in China.
So. I love it. Well, so when does cybersecurity intersect for you? Because I know it's for you. There's not a lot of people. It wasn't called cybersecurity back then, but when you go past 20 years, that's a rarer group of of folks that are working on this sort of thing. It's not the industry that it was today. I started in it, I guess, in '97 with some exposure in the Navy in the early '90s. But it was,
Yeah.
I think what information security was the term of the day. So what was your first intersection with that? And as far as I know, you go back that far, and then it stays a big part of what you focus on ever since.
Yeah. When I came back from China, it would have been what would have been 98, and so I was actually there for the Hong Kong takeover. That's a whole other story, but so I came back. Actually, ended up working at a training company that they did mostly training for for office folks on office products, and then they also did like MCSE training. So it was for NT40 back in the day, right? And so I worked for the San Diego branch of that company, and I was their network administrator, because I kind of knew computer stuff, and I ordered the books and I delivered books. And I remember when we actually were able to get on the internet, and so we put in a router, and I remember putting in the router. My boss is like, why are you assigning a password? I'm like, well, because this thing's connected to the internet and everything's connected to the internet. So you want a password, that was kind of it, just the natural thing to do, right? Even though nobody thought about it. So, and it just kind of went from there. So I, worked doing the networking stuff for probably about 6 months. And then they said, hey, why don't you start teaching? And I was like, And they're like, well, you're making 35 right now. You could make 80 if you go and pass 4 Microsoft tests. I was like, oh, I had 4 Microsoft tests passed in about 6 weeks. And so you doubled my salary overnight, started teaching. And then it was, the more classes and more exams you take, and the more money you can make. So it was like, I was just on that wheel, and did that, and had a lot of great students, great students that went on to do a lot of great things, which was really cool, and which is really exciting. That's why I still love to teach today. It also, that company kind of went through some ownership changes and then got into consulting. And so I was able to kind of do the consulting thing. That's how I actually ended up working with the Navy SEALs for 2 years. So I was teaching, doing some consulting with them. But that was really fascinating because I was with them. Basically, 9/11 happened right in the middle of that whole experience. So I had a year prior to 9/11 and then a year after. So one day, you would go onto the SEAL base. I'm not giving away any state secrets here, but there was no security. You could drive onto the base. There's no guard on the gate. Right? You could walk into and this is where they do all the buds, the SEAL training.
Coronado.
Yeah, down in Coronado,
Yeah.
And you walk through the quarterdeck, and sure there would be somebody there, but they wouldn't ask. They wouldn't bother you. Just walk right on through, and I go up to my classroom or the office. There was a room where they had like different guns and stuff that it was just propped open with a rock from the beach. And then after, of course, 9/11, and then you go back and there's 10 guards on the gate, and you have to go across the street and refile all your paperwork. So I'm this little old bee standing over there with all these huge, massive SEALs, doing all their paperwork, like Marchenko, like all the, all big names, like all these old school guys. And here I am.
Marchenko, that's a famous SEAL name. Yeah, I worked a lot with those guys from 94 to 98.
Okay, so that was like just after, probably.
Yeah.
And so I got, but so it had lots of opportunities like that. So it turned out really, really interesting. And then I ended up working at a financial services firm. It's actually called College Loan Corporation. So don't hold it against me if you have college loans. We actually process the vast majority of college loans in the country. So if it went through either University Phoenix all the way to the Ivy Leagues, that was us. So ended up moving to Greenville, South Carolina, because that's where my ex's in-laws were, and I actually did coast to coast for 2 years. Which was pretty challenging, as you might imagine. And
you go and come, or have you been in Greenville ever since?
I've been in Greenville ever since. So I think almost about 20 years.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been all over the South, and nothing to anybody in the South, but it's the one place I really like and enjoy in the South. You're in Atlanta, so but
Yeah,
sorry, the
we're
traffic
practically
down there
neighbors.
just sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, that traffic.
So,
Yeah, just
where
couldn't
does
do it.
where does OT come into play? Is that fast forwarding all the way to Fluor, or is there exposure to it before then?
Yeah, it happened really about the same time. So I kind of think, I guess when I think about it, the bowling alley, kind of there was like this, kind of OT connection, right? It just because we use computers to run
Yeah,
the bowling alley, even
it,
though
it,
it's
it's a fascinating example, right? But you're right. You push buttons, and mechanical things would move, and equipment would run, and across the room. So it
yeah,
is, yeah, it is a
put
cyber
pads down and return the
system.
ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's more moving parts on a bowling alley machine than there are on a car. And so when Stuxnet came out, and I just remember it was like, oh my gosh, this thing is just this technical marvel. I was just fascinated, especially, as you start getting the details and how it had, sure, 40 days in Windows, but for me it was, it spread to these things called controllers and these Siemens controllers. And we used to work right next door to Siemens in San Diego, but it would take control over the centrifuges, and then it would use physics, right, to break them down over time, but then it also hid from the operators what it was doing. I was just totally, totally, totally hooked. And so I started having conversations with folks. I was trying to ask. I have friends that worked like at San Diego Gas and Electric and other and the water utilities, and nobody wanted to talk about it. And I think it was either they were doing it a little bit, and it was kind of like, no, this is our magic kingdom, just you're not allowed, or they just weren't doing it and didn't want to let on to the fact. And I think it was more that than anything.
Probably, not to single out a particular company because there could have been progressive companies, but broad brushstrokes at that time would be fairly immature. And yeah, the less
Mhm.
we talk about it, the better was maybe a security approach.
Right. Right. Exactly. And
Not a very
completely
good
understand.
approach.
Yeah. So, so I just kept doing the IT security thing. I actually ended up working at a telecom in Greenville, which actually became one of the larger telecoms through Windstream. So we had about 16, 17 million residential customers, a couple 100,000 business class customers. I actually built out the SOC, which they still use today. That was kind of my claim to fame then. And then I ended up, and I did penetration testing for a year. I loved doing it. Didn't necessarily like my boss, so we had a parting of the ways, and that's okay, because I actually got a call to go work at this company called Fluor. Didn't have a clue as to what they did, who they were. I just knew it was like, oh yeah, I'm looking for a new opportunity. Got a call, got the job the next day. Turned out to be one of the world's largest engineering companies,
Yeah, it's a
and so
huge company, and I sort of rung a bell when I met you years ago. I went and looked it up. I'm sure on my phone then. I'm like, Fluor, okay, where is this? And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a massive company building huge, huge things.
yeah, we are literally, one of probably the 10 biggest construction and engineering and mostly engineering companies in the world globally. And all of our projects for the vast majority are, 500 million plus. They're mega projects, $1 billion. Our largest project right now is with Shell. It's an LNG port facility up in Canada. It's a $50 billion project. So I got
Wow.
to do a lot of the initial design, the risk assessments, and a lot of that work for that project, which is really exciting. And they're just going through commissioning now, which is even more exciting. Now it's been 7 years down the road.
Yeah,
So
oil and gas and power, that's part of the DNA of the company, right? It's over 100 years old at this point, isn't it?
we celebrated 100 years, coupled, I think, even before like right before COVID.
Yeah, I think that
And
that would have been in 1912, so 2012.
that's about right. Don't get me in trouble for not knowing exactly when.
Well, I have the
But
luxury of
and
doing my homework before having someone like you on the show. So,
yeah.
I could put people on the spot on their own stuff. I'm like, well, I just looked it up. You've been there for 13 years, so
Yeah, I keep everything in just terms of COVID apparently these days. And
Yeah, pre-COVID, post-COVID, two categories. It's either in one or the other.
right, exactly. And so I had gone on, I kept my head down for the first year or so, doing the job, right? Especially any new job. And then I realized, oh, we're an engineering company, and we probably have some of these control system things, running around. And it was like, oh yeah, actually we do. We build some of the world's largest control system environments. And whether it's for the government or for public industry and all over the world. And then I started, having conversations and talking with folks and understanding how they do security on the project. And then it really was seeing a need. We had a need to be able to, like, how do we help the customer, right? How do we have those conversations with the client to help them understand security? Because most clients didn't understand the need for security. But they didn't even want to have that conversation. We still had, even before Colonial Pipeline, we would still have a couple of customers that didn't want to have conversations around cybersecurity. Now, since Colonial Pipeline, they all want to have a conversation. But you can imagine, like a company, like a client like Shell or Saudi Aramco, they're world-class cybersecurity organizations and control systems and IT, of course. So for them, it's okay. I was really surprised because they still want to have conversations. Hey, how can we work? And we can learn from each other. That's awesome to hear an organization like that at that level, say something like that. And then you have customers on the other end where there's no security, and they say, hey, we know nothing. Help us, tell us everything we need to do, and then everything in between. So a big part of my role today is helping, each project has a cybersecurity lead. So it's helping them understand, how to work with the clients and understand their needs. And a lot of it comes down to risk assessments and understanding their risk tolerance and budget, of course. And thankfully, when you're talking about something like a $50 billion project, and you're talking about hundreds of thousands or maybe a couple million for your cybersecurity needs, that can also be used to help and ensure the operations of the facility, that it's not always the easiest sell, but it's much easier, to sell cybersecurity than I remember like in IT back in the day, where it was like pulling teeth. So, and Colonial Pipeline definitely helped.
That's interesting. These incidents, right? You mentioned a couple of big incidents that changed some behaviors. Obviously, there's Stuxnet was a moment in time that changed some behaviors or caused some awakenings at least. And then Colonial, much more recent, and its effect. And so I thought your statement that was interesting is this concept of clients before then, some progressive, some not, some caring about it. But just to go back to it, what you're saying is that since then, it is on the table now. Everybody does want to talk about it. There still could be different levels of enthusiasm, I suppose. But it's on the table. And that right there is a progressive thing. I get the question all the time from my perspective, looking at everything and talking to so many different people. Are we making progress? And it's challenging because it's like, well, I mean, I'm an optimist. And I say, yeah, I think we are. And that kind of thing shows it, right? There's maturity, there's more boards and C-level people caring about it. Is there still lots to do? Yes. And those can coexist at the same time. We are making progress. Yes, there's still lots to do. But I love hearing that now it's firmly on the table with just about any kind of customer.
For sure. Yeah, we, like you said, we've come a long way. We still have to keep going. Yeah, we definitely come a long way. I remember, we also, the other big incident, Trisis. When Trisis, of course, all of us in ICS OT cybersecurity, we thought this was going to be it. This was the one that was going to wake up the world. And I was actually in Rob Lee's grid class that week, believe it or not. And so Rob's teaching class while he's getting these texts from his team in the field, right, in Saudi Arabia, and doing the response for Trisis. And so we were getting kind of the play-by-play, at lunch and dinner. If I hadn't been bitten by the OT bug then, or by then, I definitely, was then. But it was another one. Yeah, we thought, oh yeah, this is going to wake up everybody, and nobody cared, right? Because there was no real world impact that people saw.
Yeah.
And that was different with Colonial. It was like, for me, it was like Target in the IT world. The Target breach woke up a lot of IT people. I just remember being the person screaming, "We need cybersecurity," and most businesses didn't care till Target got breached. So.
Yeah. Target was another one. I think that story for me was always the great example of we've got a world-class tool in place, but it tells us so much. We've had to tune it down or turn it down because our human beings can't handle this much information. And that's another sort of milestone. I think there's obviously a lot of work being done around how do we, and AI promises to potentially address some aspects of this issue. It's like, how do we take lots and lots of available information from more and more sensors and connected security elements than ever? And how do we give human beings a prioritized, approach to this? And there's technologies that are going to be the bridge between that, right? I mean, you can't have enough human beings reading everything and looking through everything.
No.
Yeah.
As much as we'd like to, no, we're just not made for that.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Any OT, OT war, cyber war stories. You've seen so many amazing projects and big ones. I mean, that's the one thing I sort of try to wrap my head around, the size of some of your projects. They're huge and they have so many working parts, of which you're a puzzle piece. OT cyber is one puzzle piece. So any sort of interesting stories from the road in OT cyber?
I don't have any like crazy stories. For me, my best memories are just like my first project I stepped foot on was a 1600 megawatt power plant for Dominion Energy, and one of the lines was commissioned, and I just remember the electricity just flowing over you. It just threw you. I mean, it was another one of those, like, if I wasn't into OT cybersecurity up till then, I was definitely sold at that point. Just amazing. So, we've been very fortunate, at least, in working with our clients and most of our clients, they are the target of nation state adversaries.
Yeah.
Fluor is the target of nation state adversaries. We get contacted, by companies like Dracos or the NSA and other government entities, because we're seeing some of the best APTs looking at Fluor. They don't want Fluor for Fluor data. They want Fluor for Shell data or BP or Saudi Aramco, right? Or they want access to their networks. And so what I get to see is from that perspective and from that angle. I think though that's why I also really appreciate with Colonial Pipeline, the good and the bad, right? It's helped hopefully owners and operators understand their targets too, and it did open up that kind of Pandora's box where they are now targeted by ransomware group operators, and that really didn't happen before Colonial Pipeline. So it's that double-edged sword. But
let's hop onto a topic that it's one we're writing about. We have a big event coming up, but regulations. You mentioned pipelines and how there are regulations, and there aren't very many. NERC tip goes back a ways, but there aren't many regs. There's lots of standards and emerging standards and evolving standards, but regs, that's a different thing. What do you see? Good, bad, necessary, required? What's your opinion on regulations and their effect?
I get a lot of hate mail, I guess, if that's the word, because I say I'm a big fan of regulation. I know, but doing it right, because I understand, like with remember the TSA directives came out, right, for pipeline operators and rail. So we do a lot of rail work. So I've been getting to interface with a lot of rail. Like we run the subways in Denver, Colorado. So getting to work with them to work on the TSA directives. I think it's a great start. It's one of those, and Rob Lee, makes a great point. Well, if in some environments you take some regulations and if you apply them, for the letter of the law, you're going to break things. You could even potentially kill somebody if you did this. So there's that understanding of how do we do this the right way. We understand that the laws and regulations are written by people that don't understand the differences between IT and OT. They're not engineers, right? So hopefully that's going to be changing. I'm actually speaking at Hack the Capitol at the end of the month.
Me too. I'll see you there.
Oh, well, we'll see.
I'll be doing podcasts all day. You might end up doing another podcast that day. Who knows? Because Bryson rolled me, grabbed, sort of pulled me into being the podcast host of the day. And so different guests are just going to come in that aren't coming from me. They're going to be coming from the team, and it'll be fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it just, it's great to have that conference because it's kind of going to the point we're talking about is you have the lawmakers, you have the policymakers, the congressmen and women that they don't, again, they're not engineers.
Yeah.
They don't understand. I don't pretend to be an engineer either. I'm working on my CAP right now for through ISA. But so I'm trying to be, right, at least a junior engineer. So, but I am a big fan of regulation for sure because I've seen it in IT. I remember, right? Nobody in IT was doing anything about cybersecurity until there was regulations telling them that they had to. Right, Graham
Yeah.
Leach Bliley, which was the first, act for financial services that impacted us at the college loan company that I worked at. And so it was, yeah, we had the boss finally started cutting checks for a lot of things that we had been talking about doing for a very long time. And
Yeah.
it wasn't that, great guy. He wanted to do what was right for the clients and the company, and he had a million other things to worry about. I completely understand. And it's no different in the OT world. But until you have regulations that force people, right, to do even just the basic fundamentals, right, they're not going to. And so I heard Patrick Miller the other day talk about NERC as a good low bar to start with, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of like when PCI first came out in the IT world. It's like, it's a kind of a joke, but
Yeah.
hey, something's better than nothing. And that's kind of like the TSA directives, right?
Yeah.
It's something's better than nothing. And these aren't bad things to do. So yeah, let's do it. And then hopefully over time, we just continue to build. Especially in the United States, there's just so little regulation. So much is unregulated.
Yeah.
And I just hear, I hear from a lot of people, especially since, being on LinkedIn over the last year. And, I have, CISOs from some of the largest environments will ping me and we'll jump on a call, or, folks that run even just smaller environments. And there's little to no security there. And some
Yeah.
of the larger environments, you just be surprised at who and where they are. So, but it goes back to your point earlier. I mean, things are changing, right? We've come a long way, and at least now these organizations have leadership in place that understand that they need to take steps, and they need to take steps today, if not yesterday, really. But that they're in it to fight the good fight and protect the organization and keep the people safe. So
Yeah. Well, I think we're gonna publish this podcast prior to the event. So at some point, somebody will listen to this event will be passed, but it'll be in our archives. But on June 5th, we're doing a whole event on regs and standards, and the approach that we've taken is bringing in some of the past and current stakeholders who have been on the committees and chairing the committees and sort of birthing these things. So they've been intimate with the standard or the regulation and can talk to it and take questions. And then we're going to do sort of some general sessions for everybody, but then breakouts that are specific. So if you're in Rails, you could go to the Rails specific breakout room and hammer the guys there with questions. Guys or gals who are working on the rail regs or standards. So
that's great.
Yeah, no, I'm excited about it. It's our symposium format, so it's all afternoon. We only do 3 or 4 of those a year, but so anyway, regs and standards, June 5. Check it out. I'm glad you shared your viewpoint, and I think I'm in your camp too. It's like, look, we need all the different pieces. Yes, it can be heavy-handed. Yes, it's not complete. Patrick's definitely probably right. It's sometimes just a low threshold. It doesn't mean you're secure if you comply. There's plenty of evidence where that doesn't, compliance doesn't equal security. But we're nudging and pushing and moving and trying to nudge basically businesses and organizations that are trying to make money and be profitable. And sometimes they won't maybe make the move unless they have to. And it's a puzzle piece on the board, right?
Exactly. And if I was in their shoes, I would look at it the same way. Cybersecurity is just not at the top of my list. And we just need that regulation to make sure it's on the list.
It's there. You might argue it needs to be higher or whatever, but at least it's there. And you're right. With some companies, it has not historically been there at all, especially in this realm of operating technology. A couple of things you're near the end of this that I want to definitely get in with you. Any advice for your younger self? I like something you said earlier, and so I thought, if you're sitting across from yourself early on, everybody asks where cybersecurity for OT leadership comes from. Are they engineers and they learn some cyber later? Are they cyber IT people that learn some engineering? Obviously, the answer is both. And
Yeah.
you sort of you mentioned something about learning more about engineering. I love that. As a generalist who touches lots and lots of people of very, very different backgrounds, and my background's quite diverse. And I'm not an engineer. I wouldn't call myself a deeply technical IT person either. No way. But I see the harmonization of all these things as I'm always like, build bridges, because you each have pieces to bring to the bear. The engineers don't know enough of this piece, and IT cyber people don't know enough of that piece, and fusion people who are attempting to be cover that breadth of knowledge are where the true unicorn experts are. And they might have had an origin in one particular bucket. Sure, that's 10, 20, 15 years ago, they come from something, but today it's a fusion of disciplines. And so I'm curious your comments in that area, and then just advice you give to yourself 20 years ago about getting into this space.
Sure. Yeah. And so part of my Hack the Capital talk is going to really focus on kind of, and you mentioned the unicorn, right? The OT cybersecurity professional out there, right? They're they got a PhD in engineering and a PhD in IT cybersecurity, right? And those types of people, like a Michael Asante, right, are very, very rare. And while I think you see people that are, working towards that path, they're still very rare. I talk with people all over. We have 4,000 just control system and electrical engineers at Fluor, but I have to realize not all of them are interested in cybersecurity. In fact,
right.
Very few.
Yeah.
And our IT cybersecurity team is like 32, 33 people now. There's only one person that cares about OT cybersecurity on that team. So trying to even find people that in IT that are going to be interested in OT, or on the engineering and automation side that are going to be interested in learning cybersecurity, that's a very small percentage. So I had to come to this realization, like, you can't teach everyone in IT cybersecurity about engineering and automation, and you can't teach engineers and automation folks about IT cybersecurity or just cybersecurity in OT when we talk about the IT side of the house and the OT side of the house. But I always like to think it's the same house, right? And we, like you mentioned, it's the building bridges, to use the phrase everybody does, but we all live in the same house. The goal is ultimately the same. And I've been very fortunate to work in different environments where I've seen the best, where IT and OT are completely meshed together. And it's an amazing thing. I have a new manufacturing client here in South Carolina, and they've only been up and running for a year, so maybe it's a new thing, but it's the teamwork there is amazing. And then on the other end, where I got a call from one of those CISO, one of the world's largest control system environments, without getting into the details. And we had a 45-minute conversation, and the end of it, the problem was this IT cybersecurity team was not talking with the OT cybersecurity team.
Sure.
That was it. So my partner, Mary Catherine, she's a licensed marriage and family therapist. I think IT and OT is very much like a relationship or a marriage, right? If you're fighting each other or you're not communicating, nothing's getting done. And so the attackers are winning, right? They're taking advantage of that. So we've got to, I know it's a people problem, right? But we have to, work on IT and OT really coming together in these environments. I had somebody else just reach out for help and understanding, how do we define who does what in IT and who does what in OT? Like, that's the wrong way to ask it. It's how do we come together to cover what the company needs?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a big, like I said, big part of my talk at Hack the Capital, because you're not going to get a Mike Asante or like a Rob Lee. Again, those are unicorns. So we have to get people to work together, because the vast majority of people in IT don't care about OT, and vice versa. So
I think that's right up CC's alley. Your whole message there is it isn't going to be solved by one person. We don't have enough people that are have all the knowledge necessary. Right. And it seems like respect and empathy need to be increased for respecting, what goes on over there. And I like it. I've had people on the show say, I'm from cyber, And I spent years grabbing donuts and going to the plant and saying, show me. And they trust me now. I didn't just go in there and say, let's run this scanning tool. I went in there and said, how does all this work?
Yes, big difference. I actually did a presentation for the local ISA chapter just last week. And I was just talking, I would have been 15 years ago, I would have been the person coming in saying into your power plant saying, patch everything and reboot it right tonight. Like, because I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a clue. Once you actually can just shut up and listen and learn, and it's completely different thing. But I think that the thing to stress there is, and it is like the IT versus OT, and IT is security is just like OT security, and then the people on the OT side, well, OT security is nothing like IT, and for me, both have more in common than we don't, and so we have to focus on those commonalities, and then we can focus on where they're different, like in vulnerability management, which is completely different in OT. Right, but let's focus on the commonalities, build those bridges, and then you can kind of teach each other about those differences and why. You just don't run around patching things in OT and start rebooting in the middle of the night.
Wow, that is awesome. Well, Mike, we are at one of my favorite parts of these interviews, where I use something that I've borrowed from another show, which they borrowed from another show, if I understand my history right. It's called the Devote Questionnaire. And James Lipton used it on Inside the Actor Studio for many years. I don't know what they're doing today, whether the show still exists, but I know it's syndicated in over 100 countries. And he borrowed it from a French show, hence its French name, and asked all the greatest actors and actresses on the stage, on his stage, this same questionnaire. So if you're up for it, I will ask you the same 10 questions.
For sure.
All right. What is your favorite word?
This conversions these days. It's a really great conversation starter in this space, and people see it differently. People have different takes on it. It means something different to everybody. So I can get people that love it, hate it. So it's a great conversation starter, believe it or not.
I normally don't interrupt this part of the interview, but you and I have to do a podcast just on that, because I'm also exposed to love, hate, all the different issues. Of a panel, maybe couple different stakeholders, the hate it, the love it, somebody in the middle. So,
for sure.
What is your favorite word? I'm sorry, least favorite word.
Least favorite word. I just kind of lump in any like slur that's spoken out of. I was thinking, hate, anger. There's just a lot of ugly things out there, and it's just we don't need.
What turns you on, either creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Teaching's a big thing. When I see the light come on in somebody's eye, or I get a lot of, I still probably on a weekly basis, somebody saying, hey, I watched your class on YouTube and it helped me get this internship, or I got this promotion at work, or, and I know it's somebody and that they've got a family, and that means it's more money to help, take care of their family. I mean, that's everything.
What turns you off?
Just people being ugly. It's just being jerks. There's no reason.
What is your favorite curse word?
I'm an F word guy, totally, hands down.
What sound or noise do you love?
I did think about this one. And other than you saying, when I like to go hiking and nature, but there's, and I guess it's kind of falls in line with a lot that you hear, but when my partner and I, at the end of the day, and we're cuddled up with the dog, and they both make kind of this little sigh when it hits, it's perfect. It is, so, yeah.
What sound or noise do you hate?
The trash truck at 2:30 in the morning. It's that's like, really 2:30? Yeah.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I always think a video game developer would be kind of fun, or not writing code, but actually designing the games. I think would be a lot of fun.
What profession would you like to not do?
The least job favorite, like I would ever want to do, would be like the person that calls people the bill collector. That definitely would not be on my list.
And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Like, I think she'd say something along the lines of, "Oh, it turned out all right after all, did it? I'll take that."
Oh, well, thank you, Mike Holcomb. I'm just finishing up a podcast with Mike Holcomb. He is the fellow and director for cybersecurity and the ICS/OT cybersecurity global lead at Fluor Corporation, a corporation with 40,000 plus employees, building amazing infrastructure across the world. And if you don't know Michael, he's prolific in his teaching. He's got a great website, michaelholcomb.com. He's got videos on YouTube, many different aspects of training that he offers for free to the world. He is a father, a partner, a grandfather, a teacher, a learner, an organizer, a gamer, and a heck of a nice guy, and very generous with his time. So, Mike, thanks for coming on the show and doing what you do and becoming a fellow recently. A lot of things to be that we're grateful over here at CSA for you.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. No, thank you for everything, really.
All right, take care and be well.
You too. Appreciate it.